Hi everybody, my name is Ann. Welcome back to Art on the Creek. Here we are for another beginner watercolor lesson. I'm going to show you something really fun today that you're going to be able to use throughout your watercolor career. We're going to work on negative painting. We're going to use a real easy subject, and since it's March, thought we'd do some shamrocks. Are you ready? Let's see what we can come up with. Well, I have all of our usual suspects as our supplies, but I wanted to talk to you about a little spray bottle like this. A lot of you, like me, might live in a really dry climate, but if you don't have a pipette where you can just put a drop of water on each of your paints, you can always get one of these, and I really like them. It's just a small, well, it's a little bit bigger than, it's about the size of a chapstick, lip balm, but it's longer, and you just fill it with water and spray your paints. If you're ever painting outdoors, that's when I really feel like I need to do this. Despite living in a dry climate, there are some paints I have that I like to pre-wet, but typically I just don't. But if you ever do, or you feel like you need to, something like this might be a good idea. Or a pipette, but not everyone can find these, it seems. So we have all of our usual suspects. Like I said, I'm gonna scoot this over and let me tape off my watercolor paper. This is optional, you don't have to do this. But with our project today, you might want to go ahead and tape off the edges just because we're going to be using a lot of glazes and it will be getting kind of wet. Now what I want to do today is I've got a great reference photo from Pixabay, and it's just, I'll put it up right here, it's a lot of clover. And to look at it, you would think, oh my gosh, we are not painting that. And no, we're not going to paint that. We're going to do something very simple, but I wanted to use it to refer to what clover looks like because I don't have any here where I am. And gosh, I wonder in this picture if there's a 4-leaf clover. I'll tell you what, you guys download this photo, and if you look it over, if you find a 4-leaf clover, let me know. So, all right, I'm just going to pick one at random to do the first one. There's a lighter green one kind of in the lower left here. So I'm just going to start with that one. It's kind of a heart shape, and there it comes to a center like that. And then this leaf is a little bit behind, coming up like so, down into that center, and then this one comes over this one just a little, and it comes from behind here like so. And then there is a little line in each one, but I don't want to put that in yet, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so here's what we have for our first drawing. Just a very simple little 3-leaf clover. We're going to start with our 3/4 inch stroke, and we're using the Princeton Snap line of brushes. We're gonna wet the entire paper, so I'm just getting a lot of water on my brush, spreading it around, and then about now we're gonna check to make sure that we've got a nice even coat, a nice even sheen to the water. We don't want any puddles. We just want it to kind of pick up the light really evenly. I'm going to put a little bit more water on mine because it is so dry today. The color that we're going to use is the sap green, this lighter one here. So let's go in that. And again, with your 3/4 inch stroke brush, we're just going to make a nice puddle here. Doesn't have to be too much paint right now because we want it fairly thin, about like skim milk. All right, and now all we're going to do, I'm going to hold this up a little bit. We just want to fill this whole page, our whole painting with this very light green. Now remember, your watercolor, when it dries, does have a color shift. It will dry a couple of shades lighter than what you're putting on. So I'm going over this with another layer and just kind of making sure I've got it fairly evenly distributed. It does not have to be perfect. You can see there's a puddle developing toward the bottom there. That's the one thing you want to avoid in this particular exercise, is to try and keep that wash as even as possible and avoid those puddles if you see them coming up anywhere, because we don't want to get a back run in this particular one. A back run is when you have that puddle of water and the remainder of your painting dries, the water has nowhere to go, so it seeps back up into your painting. And that's what it looks like when you see a book that's got water damage on it. That's the kind of look that you'll see there. Once you're satisfied with that wash of green all over your page, you're just going to want to dry it with a heat tool, and or you could let it dry naturally, just walk away from it and come back when it's completely dry. Since this will be our lightest value, I did decide to draw 2 more clover, just so that we wouldn't have that one clover staring out at us when we're done. I didn't want it to stand out and be just one single. So now we're going in around that drawing of the 3 clover that we made. I'm still using the 3/4 inch stroke brush. You can switch to your 6 if you think that this one is going to be too hard to control. But we're putting in a wet wash over dry. So this is wet into dry. And we're going around the perimeter of all 3 of those clover leaves very carefully. We just want it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you're only filling in the background at this point. We'll continue to fill in the next wash or glaze of sap green, and we're avoiding the clover that we've drawn. So can you see how negative painting gets its name? You are filling in the negative space. Rather than painting those clover, we're painting the area around the clover, and then that is generating the shape of the clover. This is why I suggested in the beginning, I think to, if you didn't want to use a pencil, you might want to use a watercolor pencil to do this, because then you can get your lines to disappear. But we're going to go over this when we're done with the fine liner to give it a really cool stained glass effect. So pencil lines won't matter for you here. And especially when you're just learning the negative painting technique, I think using a pencil is absolutely fine. We're going to continue with this pattern of drawing, painting a glaze, and then drying it thoroughly, drawing the next leaves, painting around them, and then drying it thoroughly. We're going to continue that for a while, because what we're doing is we're developing different depths and layers of those of the clover, just like we see in our reference photo. As we move on, the clover will be darker, and so it will recede into the depths of the clover. And then the background, of course, is just going to be the darkest green, and that will that could either serve as grass or remaining clover that we just can't see. So we'll continue on with this with the sap green. I'm just drawing 3 at a time, and 3 little clover plants at a time, and I'm trying to overlap them, tuck them underneath, just to get it so that it's they definitely look like they're crowded in there and kind of layered all over. So here we go with our next glaze. I'm going to switch to a number 6 round, because now we've got a little bit of intricacies going. Still using just the sap green. But let's switch to a number 6 round, and then we'll go around the outline of what we need to do first and then fill in the background after that. And you can see with our 3rd layer, our 3rd glazing of sap green, it is getting quite a bit darker, and that's wonderful. We still have a transparency to it, but the color is taking on a more intense hue. Even though it's the same shade, we're still able to create this negative painting of our clover by just going around the background. We have not changed our pigment at all. We're still using the sap green. And right now I've just moved on to a number 6 brush, because I wanted to be able to get into those intricate details areas just a little bit easier. And then with every layer, we're going to want to smooth it out and try and get that background just as even as we can. You might have to add some water to it. You might have to finesse it a little bit, because you want to keep that value of green about the same. And here I'm going in with my stroke brush to try and cover up a larger area a little more efficiently now that I've got all the outlining done. But you just want to make sure that you get that background nice and smooth, nice and even. And again, it does not have to be perfect. It's okay to have some texture in there, but you do want to strive for even distribution. All right, let's go ahead and dry this one, and we'll move on. The next step after we've got this dry is simply to repeat the process one more time. It's okay if your paintbrush has gone into those clover bits a little bit, because remember, again, we are going to go in with a fine liner to really get those edges defined, and we can create folds where we need to, so that's absolutely fine. Just draw 3 more clover leaves and then go in one more time with the sap green wash for the background. Another good tip I can give you, which I didn't always achieve with this painting here with this demonstration. What I want to encourage you to do is to try and create enough paint in your puddle, especially because the next layer we're going to mix pigments, and we don't want to try and get that ratio exactly correct with subsequent mixes. So you want to make sure that you've mixed enough paint, or that you have enough paint liquidated on your palette, so that you can go in here and get this value of green, fairly even around the whole thing without having to dip in and mix more. Because if you do need to do that, to dip in and mix more, it's fine. It's not a huge problem, but what it will do is it will allow your painting to have time to dry. And the real key to this negative painting is to be able to keep everything an equal level of moisture, of wetness on your paper. And that's why I really like teaching beginner students this technique, because it really is a great exercise for just about everyone. And I don't do it often enough, but I'm so glad that we were able to do it today. So let's move on to our next layer, which is going to be a mix. We'll get this one dry after the wash is all done. Now for this next layer, I am going to mix in some ultramarine blue. So let's get a good bit of that sap green. And then let's go into our ultramarine blue and mix that up. We're going to darken that green just a little. With your mix of ultramarine and sap green waiting for you, you can go ahead and draw 3 more leaves. Just remember to tuck them underneath, make them varying shapes and sizes. You can even have one standing out free if you didn't want to overlap, just however you want to draw those in. With your number 6 brush, you can go ahead and begin to fill in those more intricate areas. And then what we'll do is we'll come in with that 3/4 inch stroke brush and pull that pigment out so that we can get a nice even wash. Here we're loading up the pigment on our brush, and then we'll just pull it all the way to the edge there. We'll repeat the same process on the other side, just trying to keep that pigment loose enough, adding enough water so that it will last the duration of our background. If you've mixed enough, that'll be fairly easy. If you haven't mixed enough, you might have to water it down a little bit more. Right now I'm working to get rid of some hard edges because I want it to be a pretty smooth wash. All right, now we're going to mix another layer. Let me move this out of the way. With this wash, we're going to bring it more into the blue zone. So we're going to start with the ultramarine blue and just get a fairly decent puddle there. I'm using my number 6 round, getting a little bit more water. And now we're going to go into our other green, our cool green, the Viridian Hue. That's right next to your sap green. And we're just going to mix that to kind of make a tealy turquoise shade. And the ratios don't matter, it just needs to be darker than what we've got right now. So let's draw a couple more shamrocks. Let's see here. This one's coming down this way. We're going to start over here where we have the most open space. Our drawing might be getting a little harder to see, so do the best that you can. Getting that background as smooth as you can. Another drawing. We are almost done. Now let's draw just a few more. We'll come over here. Well, you've made it this far. We are definitely in the home stretch. For our final layer, we are just going to use straight Viridian. We want a very generous pile of this. Keep it kind of thick. We can add water to it as needed, but let's make a good sized puddle of Viridian on our palette. Once you have enough paint mixed to fill in all of the background, all the places where you haven't drawn any clover leaves, go back in with your number 6 round and we'll just fill these spaces in, trying to keep our brush strokes fairly even so that we don't have too many brush lines in this. It's a big challenge to do this and have it look perfect. So it's really something that I recommend for all my students to continue to practice on. When you'll see that mine is done, I myself could use some more practice at this. It's always a challenge when you're working with watercolor because you want to make sure that everything maintains a uniform layer of wetness, of moisture. And that just makes it such a challenge. It also makes it really a joy to work with, I think. It's almost like doing a puzzle. You really need to pay attention to where you are and where you're going and to have a plan. And with this negative painting, you're able to eliminate some of those factors. You've got a sort of a plan. You're just making Clover, but you don't need to worry too much about composition. You know, you don't need to worry about how to mix your colors. You're basically using different levels of greens. And then you're just going to go in and paint around what you've drawn. So negative painting, especially something like this, any kind of layered floral or botanical, really does give you a lot of room to practice some very basic watercolor techniques. Now, this paper is a good paper to do it on. It is 100% cotton. I think what happened here on my last wash is I did have the paint just a little bit too thick. I'm pleased with the result though, so let's go ahead and move on to where we're drying this, and then we can put in our ink lines and achieve that great stained glass effect. This session where you're drying your painting, you want to be really thorough. Make sure it's absolutely dry, because when we go in with our ink pen, we don't want it to bleed anywhere at all. This one is the one that we're using. It's the Kuretake Fudena Gokuchi. It's hard for me to say. And now we're going to go in and just kind of outline all of these shamrocks. Let's start from where we started. Using a fine liner can really add some great dimension to your watercolor, and I really enjoy this ink and wash technique. What you can do if you have some errant strokes of where you didn't want the watercolor to go, and we do have that in a few places here, you'll see what we can do with the fine liner right on this edge here. I can clean that up by bringing it in a little. If you see the little loops that are on the edges of some of the leaves, that will make it look like a fold, and it just turns out to be exactly the way we want it. You can do more to this if you want to. You could go in with colored pencil and add some shading, but for our little St. Patrick's Day greeting, this is done. So let's just take the tape off, and I would like to use the heat gun to pull off the tape. And when you're pulling it off, you always want to go at a 45-degree angle. So I've got the tape this way. I want to pull it, 90-degree angle. I want to pull it this way. This one's working really well. Hey, it didn't leach under at all. Well, that's a fun little March drawing, a little St. Patrick's Day piece. Go ahead and sign it, and since this is so dark here, I'm going to sign down here in the margin. And I just put my name and the year so that I can remember about when I did this. And there you go. There's your St. Patrick's Day painting for this lesson number 8. I can't believe we've already are on our 8th lesson. Happy spring, happy March. I hope that where you are, it's starting to warm up. You guys take care, stay warm. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll see you next week on our next lesson. Bye. As always, if you've made it this far, I hope that means that you're enjoying content like this and that you're enjoying your time spent here on my channel. I really hope that you're having fun learning to watercolor. If you care to, you can tag me on Instagram at Art on the Creek when you post your work. I would love to see it. Have a great day, everyone. Bye now.